Welcome, everyone, to another episode of Exhuming the X-Files here on the Outpost Unknown YouTube channel. I am Matthew. He is Jeremy.
Hey, everybody.
And every Friday night, we talk about a new episode of one of our favorite TV shows. So hit that like and subscribe and follow along, because this week we are splashing around in the poopy sewer water to investigate a nasty-ass monster of the week. We are talking The Host, directed by Daniel Sackheim, written by Chris Carter, which first aired on September 23rd, 1994. So, I will state up front that this is one of my all-time favorites, favorite episodes. I have the action figure of this little fluke man monster. That's one of my prized toys that I have. I remember this distinctly as a kid. This episode left an impression on me. It's always left an impression on me. I kind of love everything about it. Did you remember this episode? Was this one that stood out to you before you rewatched this one?
It was sort of at the very, very end, the very last scene. I'm like, oh yeah, I remember this shit.
Yeah, I thought that this. Well, we'll get into it. Let's go ahead and walk us through The Host.
Right off the bat, we find out that the Ruskies, the Reds, are off the coast, about 2 miles off the coast of Jersey, with a flooded shitter. So the guy that's in charge of this Russian boat that is for some reason very close to America decides he's going to go get the FNG, the fucking new guy, to go fix this shitter problem.
I love that guy. He's like, why do I have to do it? Because you're the new guy.
And so he opens up the tank, apparently, that they store all their duty water in. He's like, this episode just starts gross because you see this toilet just backing up, and not just like little bits, like it's just sewer water is just pouring out of this toilet.
So gross.
And so he pops this door off. He's got a face on him like, oh my god, it doesn't ever stop. And he starts, I don't know what he's doing. Like, he reaches inside the tank and then something grabs him. And then all of a sudden all the other guys are like, oh my god, he's getting grabbed. So they're trying to get a hold of him. They can't get a hold of him. He gets pulled into the shit tank. The dude says, purge the tanks, and they just dump all of this stuff into the sea. It's like, why didn't you just fucking do that in the first place?
Because it wouldn't be as gross. you gotta make the audience feel really uncomfortable and ooked out. And one of our listeners, I'm trying to find who it was. One of our listeners left a comment on our Tombs episode.
No more poop.
Said, please don't talk about any more poop. Well, it's impossible not to talk about poop on this episode. So
there's duty water everywhere.
Oh, we're gonna get down in it. Now, this is a cool opening intro, too. This is one of those perfect intros in my mind that sort of sets the stage. It's like, this is so gross and horrifying. What in the hell is in this sewer water? And as a kid, I could not wait to find out.
Yeah, they left a lot to the imagination. They know that there's something in there, but you didn't even get like a flash of a tail or an arm or anything. So you just kind of had to guess what horrible thing just pulled poor Dimitri down into the poo-poo water and drowned. And so we go back to Mulder. I think, doesn't this episode start with Mulder again listening to tape?
Yep.
And some agent comes in and says, I'm your relief. Skinner needs you at the office for a new assignment.
No, what's funny about this, and Alyssa actually noticed this when we were watching it, is when the camera pans across like Mulder's desk, he's drinking a can of soda, and it says Sasha, not Shasta. it's like they couldn't actually get Shasta can in there; they had to do Sasha. Just a funny observation.
Grape shit. And so he tells him to go down to Jersey. They have something for him that he's got to go take a look at. He shows up, and the first thing the cops do is pull or plop these high water rubber boots down in front of him. What sort of fresh hell is this? He puts them on. He goes down in the sewer, and immediately he's like, oh. Everybody's like, thankfully nobody says the, oh, you get used to it after a while line. Like everybody's just suffering
Yeah, they're all
in this
hacking up like
gross sewer.
as
Yeah,
soon as
yeah.
it's so gross.
He goes and they go to this body. Is like, okay, what's bizarre, what's different about it, or why am I looking at this? And the cop doesn't really have an explanation for him. He's just like, well, you know, the bureau wanted to be involved. And so Mulder gets pissed, starts storming out of this sewer, and just says, package that body and send it to the FBI. I'm out of here. And then
Care of
he apparently
Assistant
just,
Director Skinner.
yeah, it goes straight back to assistant or director Skinner's office to bitch at him.
I
Like
love this scene.
He's fucking pacing back and forth in front of a door that doesn't have a secretary at it. The secretary comes out and he's like, I need to see him right now. She's like, no, he can't. He's not available. And the door opens and you see Skinner standing there and he's like, we need to talk. And Skinner's like, I don't have time right now. Okay, fine, fucking do it. He comes into the room and he's doing a full conference with it looks like department heads and stuff. So
You want to tell everybody why your homicide case isn't important, Agent Mulder?
yeah,
And just the look on Mulder's face when he turns and he sees all those people in the room, he's just like, oh, it's like a metaphor. He was in the shit in the sewer, and now he's in the shit in his work office as well. Like he's just in the shit all over in this episode.
but he tries to word his displeasure in having to go or get assigned to this bullshit ass job in the most professional way possible. It doesn't really save his skin a whole lot because fucking Skinner just flays him in front of those people, just lets him have it,
Yeah.
and then sends his ass on his like, I expect a full field or a detailed full field report that just sends his ass on his way. So there's no question who's in charge here for just a moment. And he kind of had it coming to him.
Oh yeah, yeah. I mean, he was Mulder's kind of at the end of his rope here, I think, with all of the stuff because he assumed that Skinner, because when he first gets pulled off this wiretap thing, the guy's like, "Oh, your Skinner requested your assistance on that." He's like, "Oh, Skinner." Skinner requested, and then he gets there and he's just like, "What the hell?" He thinks that they are just jerking him around to teach him a lesson, to put him in his place. But turns out, no, this is going to be a legitimate thing.
So where am I at in my? He meets with Scully again. Scully, just like episode 1, is still doing as great a job as she can as cheerleading Boulder's feelings of usefulness because he just doesn't.
I love when he tells her she's like, "Hey, can I sit next to you here?" And he's like, "Well, I should warn you, I'm experiencing violent impulses." Very deadpan.
She comes right back at him. She's like, well, I'm armed, so I don't care.
Yep. I always draw my gun first, Fox.
And he convinces her to take a look at that body to see if there's anything. No, I think she volunteers for it. She's like,
yeah, because he wants to leave the FBI. That's the big thing in this sequence. Because he tells her, he's like, I'm thinking about leaving the FBI, and I'm tired of being kind of dicked around. And she's like shocked. She's like, "You're gonna leave the bureau?" And he's thinking, he's like, "Yeah, I'm kind of sick and tired of this shit. I'll go figure out something to do in the paranormal."
And so she decides that the best way forward is we need to work together again. So I will go look at this body they found at the sewer just to see if there's anything at all that you would be interested in. And sure enough, she finds something.
I'll say this is the first episode where I think the effects budget really shines. That decomposing body I thought looked really, really good.
Excellent.
Even to this day, it looks super, super good.
I can't believe they showed that on network television back then.
Yeah.
It was gross, but
yeah, but it looks great. And she does the autopsy, right? So she takes the rib cage off and everything, and you see all the internal organs and stuff there. She's doing it. It looks awesome.
And as she's surfing around in the chest cavity, she finds this thing that's moving around. It's this fluke. larger than normal. She puts it in a jar. She hands it over to Mulder, and he immediately begins jumping to conclusions.
Well, before we get past this autopsy thing, the thing I wrote down in my note was Scully wear a fucking mask, pulling out that fluke worm. She doesn't just easily pull it out. She's like struggling to pull this thing out. I'm like, you're getting its juices all up on you. And all these other autopsies she does, she has a mask on, but she does it here, and it makes it even grosser. I'm like, oh god. But that fluke coming out of that body, ugh. Ugh, it's like
Yeah,
a Monsters Inside Me episode. I do not like it. It's
it,
gross.
it was top shelf for the time, like special effects. Though that look, there's no CGI. It just looked good,
Yep,
and
still does.
as gross as it needed to be to lend to the rest of the episode, because everywhere you go, it's a sewer. It's a. We'll get more to it. So we get back to that same area where they found the body at, and some sanitation workers are trying to clear a clogged drain. And one guy that's down, like wading in the duty water, pulling branches out of a storm drain. He gets pulled under and seemingly sexually assaulted. I don't like. He's not getting really drug around, but he's screaming and stuff. He ends up getting pulled out by his buddy. His buddy barely gets him out of the water, and he just kind of touches him a little bit, notices that he's bleeding, is like, I'm gonna go get some help, and just leaves him in the sewer.
Yeah.
And what was
We should point out that Mulder did get a phone call before this where just some mysterious person says you have a
oh
friend at the FBI and hangs up. The other note that I have here is Gillian Anderson looking very, very pregnant in this episode. Her face just keeps getting bigger and bigger and bigger in all these episodes. It's like she's
I
definitely
hadn't
pregnant.
been I hadn't been paying that close of attention. I guess I didn't know. I know now that I'm going to look for it, but I wasn't aware of it, so I wasn't quite there. Okay, so sanitation worker goes down to the hospital. He needs to get unfucked from the situation. He says that he has this huge wound that looks like a bite mark on his back from a leech or something, but a giant one. He says that he can't get this taste out of his mouth, which lends to the whole grossness of
Yes.
the episode. For some reason, and I still don't know why, Mulder just shows up at this guy's health appointment, like walks in and no. He starts talking to the doctor that is addressing this, but it wasn't.
Yeah, he's trying to figure out like because he hears that the guy's been attacked, and he goes to sort of see like, okay, well, what was the guy attacked by? And guy is like, well, I don't know, I think it was like a boa constrictor or something. And Mulder's like, what? He's like, yeah, I mean, I was bitten by a giant alligator. He's like, people like flush them down the drain and stuff like that. So I think Mulder went there to speak to the guy because he had gotten attacked, and he was trying to question him as to, well, did you see anything? And I don't remember if the Scully Mulder fluke scene was before that or not. But there is this moment when Scully tells Mulder, "Hey, you got to come check out what I found." And Mulder's looking at this fluke in this jar, and Scully's telling him, "Well, fluke worms can do this and they can do that." And Mulder Mulder immediately jumps to, well, geez, maybe it's a giant fluke worm that's eating people. And Scully starts laughing because Mueller goes, well, could it be possible? And Scully's like, no, they don't get that bad. Or she's like, no, that can't be possible. And then Mueller goes, well, how big can these things get? Like in total seriousness? And she starts laughing, and then she catches herself and she says, like, it felt like old times there for a second that you're jumping to a giant fluke worm is eating people. And then he has that great line where he's like, well, that's good. I didn't want to tell Skinner his suspect was a giant blood sucking worm. That was another great interaction between Mulder and Scully that goes throughout these first few episodes, in which just they're kind of separated. They don't really get to work together anymore, but you can see that they still want to be together, and they miss partnering up on these cases and going for it.
sanitation worker goes home after getting his wound dressed and whatnot, and he's pulling an Ace Ventura at the sink with the toothpaste, like he's trying to get the flavor out of his
Yeah.
mouth. And I don't know if you guys have seen Ace Ventura 1. It has a lot of themes in it that people would get canceled for nowadays, but it's still a pretty excellent movie.
Ace Ventura is awesome. I even like the sequel, When Nature Calls. The Rhino is my favorite thing Jim Carrey's ever done.
So,
I can never stop laughing when I see that.
but he's brushing his teeth. He's adding more toothpaste, brushing it more. He starts squirting it directly into his mouth and just filling it up because he's trying to get this flavor out. And then he starts vomiting blood. And I'm like, you know what? And the following scene is he gets in the shower and continues vomiting blood until a worm comes out of his body and goes into the sewer. Like, you know what? This guy is clearly just one of those guys. They could be vomiting up blood while brushing his teeth. Like, insurance isn't going to cover this, so just gonna write it out, see where it goes.
The toothpaste thing was one of those things that really stuck with me as a kid because I remember that image from this scene. It's not so much him barfing up the fluke in the shower. It was just I don't think as a kid I'd ever seen someone squirting a giant tube of toothpaste like that into their mouth and in like this nasty, gross way. Obviously, in Ace Ventura, it happens for what we would now say problematic reasons. But here, I don't remember what came first. What was this show or Ace Ventura was, but I just distinctly remember being weirded out by this guy putting this squeezing this tube of toothpaste in his mouth. Stuck with me.
I mean, it looked pretty gross, and then when the blood started coming, it turned into like this pink, bloody foam.
Yeah,
it's not good. So we get over to the sewage treatment facility for little reason, and there's a dude with a hard hat outside. He sees something, the poop merman swimming around. And just like the Russians,
Turdman. Alyssa calls him Turdman.
He purges one of the tanks, just like the Ruskies did on the ship, and he somehow traps.
It's like Augustus Gloop trapped in Willy Wonka's factory going up there. He jumps into the chocolate river, and this is like the chocolate poop water, and he gets stuck in the tube.
I think chocolate river would do in both cases. But they call Mulder over. They take a look at it. No, wait. The next scene we see him in, they have the fluke man, the poop man, the turd man, whatever you want to fucking call him, like in a holding cell in the dark corner.
Well, there is a scene that's an important scene right before this where Mulder is talking to Scully, and he tells Scully because we find out later his convent is X. This is the new Deep Throat, essentially the replacement. And he tells Scully, hey, don't go to bat for me. I don't know who you talk to, but, I don't need friends at the FBI or whatever he says. And Scully's like, I would never betray your confidence. I didn't tell anybody anything. And that's when eventually Mulder leaves and he goes and he sees the fluke. Now, this gets to the thing I hate about this episode. It's a very small thing, but I wrote this down in my notes. When Mulder they turn the flashlight on and they see the turd man in the tube, this thing looks like the most disgusting monster creature anyone has probably ever laid their eyes on. And they cut to a reaction of Mulder basically having no reaction to seeing this thing at all. He just kind of like looks over at the guy. Now the dude in the hard hat, whatever, is like shocked. Mulder, no shock whatsoever. And I'm like, that would have been a perfect time to show Mulder almost being like, what the fuck am I looking at? Because anybody in that situation would be like, this ain't normal. Aliens is one thing. Turd men, that's something completely different. I just don't like the reaction shot they used.
Understandable. But, well, no, because he hasn't really seen any monsters outside of tombs. So.
Yeah, nothing that looks like this thing.
You're right. And so they arrest it and they move it to a holding. This monster, there's nothing human about it. It looks like the creature of the Black Lagoon, only gross.
It is an amazing makeup costume. I mean, it looks so cool and gross and nasty. Again, they had a budget this season and they put it to good use because this thing looks gross and it's all wet and slimy as well. Everything this season so far has been wet and slimy.
Yep. And kind of, I think it's impressive that they were able to put that costume together, because that costume also had to be wet all of the time and had to go underneath water without drowning the guy inside of it.
Yep.
And it still looked really, really good without being like, they didn't darken this episode like they darkened the werewolf episode. They didn't mind showing this at all.
Yeah. Well, I mean, when you got something that looks that good, show it off.
Sure. So, case over. Skinner reads the fucking your killer was a blood sucking monstrosity worm guy, and he just all right, this is a good report. Did good. And Fox is just like, are you for real? Yeah, everything's in your report.
Thought you'd have a little bit more of a reaction. And again, it gets back to, but Mulder himself had no reaction when he saw the fluke man. So why is he shocked that Skinner has no real reaction when he's reading the report about it?
But they're doing this thing where it's coming across as Skinner thinks, it feels like Skinner maybe values the mission of the X-Files.
Yeah.
That he feels that there's a need for it. There's a need of particular investigators to go after it. And so he's trying to allow that to happen, but also keeping Mulder like, you need to do this the right way, not the fucking crazy way that you did in season 1.
Yeah. Well, Skinner's literally sitting there talking about, we arrested it. We're going to do the arraignment. We're going to take Turdman into the court because he killed X amount of people or whatever. And Mulder's like, this is not a man. It's a monster. You can't just arrest it and have it walk around and like it's a normal thing. And Skinner's like, well, what the hell should we do with it? And Fox has like no real answer to that whatsoever. It's like, well, yeah, he did murder these things. Like, what can we do here? Also, we missed the fact that X is sort of like involved in this. There's a scene before this when he slides a copy of the National Enquirer under Scully's door.
Oh yeah.
Because when Scully comes to help Mulder, she has figured out who the guy in the sewers at the beginning of the episode that Mulder was supposed to be investigating.
Dimitri, who got flushed during the credits.
Yeah. And Mulder's like, how in the hell did you even make this connection in the first place? And she's like, well, somebody slid, the friend at the FBI, whatever, slid the National Enquirer under. And I guess if you're a young person listening to this podcast or the show on YouTube, and you might be wondering, like, National Enquirer, I don't even know if that kind of stuff still exists. I know Weekly World News is gone, but if you go to the grocery store, do they just have National Enquirers there still? I don't even know. Okay. So it's
just not talking about the weird shit. It's more politicized.
Okay. There used to be like the Weekly World News, and I'd get those all the time, where it would just have all kinds of weird, strange, like monster and UFO stuff. A lot of it made up and fake and stuff like that. But I like the it sort of was nostalgic for me that Scully got this National Enquirer type thing with all these weird, wacky stories, and that's how she sort of put it together. The other thing that was really important, another moment here, was Scully tells Mulder that before he goes to talk to Skinner, if Mulder decides to leave the X-Files, she would consider it more than a professional loss. So again, getting to the fact that she really cares for him and does not want him to quit, which is sort of hanging over the episode. Is Mulder going to quit the X-Files?
Well, okay. And then he just kind of comes to that agreement with, well, not an agreement, but just kind of all right, well, Fluke Man got arrested. The U.S. Marshals took over, put him in a lockdown vehicle, and then starts driving him. They have him tied to a stretcher, like belted down to a stretcher, and there was only one dude in the front of this armored ambulance. Like there's a separator divider between the front and the ambulance in the back. he can see back there, but whatever suspect or bad guy, whatever person you're locked up back there, you don't want him to fuck with the driver at all.
Yeah.
So the driver's driving along at night again, because we only transport prisoners after dark, and looks in the back and sees nothing. There's nothing on the stretcher anymore. So he calls backup with some sort of code that must mean, escape prisoner or some shit like that. Like, I need backup. Gets his shotgun and goes around back and decides to open it. Doesn't wait for backup. Just crawls inside of the ambulance with this monster that was tied up back there. And then he gets killed. Or off screen. He shoots the shotgun a couple of times, but you're in the back of a very tiny ambulance. You got a shotgun in your hand. You don't really, not a lot of maneuverability.
He played hero, and he cost him his life.
Stupid. So the fluke man, Turdman, he gets out, and you notice that they're right next to a lake, like a campground. You see these campground signs around, but instead of going to the lake, he goes to the nearest 2-man porta potty sitting next to there's 2 porta potties sitting next to each other, and he crawls inside the shitter. Like,
into the poop.
Come on, dude. There's a lake. They wouldn't have found you. So he sits there in the dark, and they even do this camera shot where it goes through the front door and then aims through the center hole of where the porta potty is, and there is his gross ass is just looking all happy. He's covered in poop and blue goo.
Well, then they come to empty the porta potty the next morning with the big giant tube, and then it's struggling, and the dude's trying like, why is there so much poop in here? Like, this thing is, and you just see like the as the fluke man's getting put into the sewage truck, and I love this shit, no pun intended. This is so awesome to me, because again, it's so gross and icky and ugh. Way worse than Toombs' little nest that he was building. This is even grosser to me than that.
So the new mysterious phone guy, X, calls Mulder again and tells him that the X-Files must reopen. It's a necessity that it does. And then hangs up on him. So he's doing that shit again.
Being all cryptic and shit. Reinstatement of the X-Files must be undeniable.
They end up back at the sewage treatment plant because all of the honey wagons are supposed to go to the sewage treatment plant in order to offload their goods. And they figure out that the monster isn't again swimming around the tanks where they trapped it like Charlie in the Chocolate Factory again. That it must be working its way back up the sewer system.
Yeah.
And trying to work its way out to the ocean. So they go down to basically where they found the body at in the very beginning of the episode in the first place. Only Mulder doesn't have the rubber boots on. Like, they do this shot where they zoom in on his shoes, and he's just got these great, leather kicks. His normal shit, and they're just like, all right, you're just gonna go down in the sewer like that, just turd stomping in some very, very nice shoes.
Oh God!
They get down to this area where they think, I can't remember what they called it, a cauldron, or it's some big area where stormwater will fill up, and if it gets filled up to a certain point, the overflow will end up dumping out into the ocean. But everything leads to this point, and so this monster would end up here. And Mulder's telling the head of this sewage treatment plant, he didn't even send one of his guys. Like, the head manager, dorky office guy that runs the sewage treatment plant, goes down to the sewer with him. He's like, hey man, could you shut the outflow port? And the guy's like, sure. Business suit on, tie. Goes over and he's like, oh, it's rusted shut. I gotta jump up and down on it. He ends up falling into the water, and of course, the Turdman, whatever the fuck he is, just immediately grabs him and starts raping him. And Mulder tries to grab him out, and he gets pulled down. Like, he pulls his gun for just a second, And then his gun just vanishes for the rest of the episode. I don't know what happened there, but he gets a hold of the business guy and kind of gets him away from it, and then the monster starts crawling into the outflow pipe. So Mulder gets up and gets over to this fence thing, and he pulls a Toombs on the or with the escalator, just grinding him up. He's like, "Fuck it, I'm just
Yeah.
gonna cut this dude's head off," and drops it like a guillotine on the center of this monster, just cuts him in half.
Get that nice close up of Turdman's reaction to it's like ah, and they're like, oh, it's all done. Turdman has been successfully vanquished.
Well, his legs were.
Yes.
A few moments later, we're talking to Scully, and Scully's talking about the regenerative qualities of flukes and how
She just now brings that up.
you can cut them up and they're going to grow back into whole objects. And then they speculate, having the hot sheets, the Men in Black reference, the hot sheets slipped under her door, that this must have been a mutation of the Chernobyl accident.
Yeah, because it was a Russian tanker that was transporting Chernobyl materials or something.
2 miles off the shore of the Americas. Like, our Navy would have put a bullet, many bullets, in that boat.
Yeah. Hey, I'm gonna roll with it.
And okay, so it's a Chernobyl guy that got mutated into some sort of fluke and got on a Russian transport, came to America. Okay, fine. And then the very last shot. You know what? You're gross, man. Why don't you take it?
Well, the very last shot is Turdman. It's kind of like a slow motion sort of thing in the water going down on his face, and then his eyes open, and Turdman is still alive, and presumably could come back in the future. So, and Mulder does have a really cool line before we see the reveal that Turdman opens his eyes and is still alive, where it always kind of like was creepy to me as a kid, especially with Mark Snow's music, how it goes over like the little creepy piano. But Mulder says, he says, quote, they say 3 species disappear every day. You wonder how many new ones are being created. And I remember as a kid hearing that, and that just kind of like sparked my imagination because I had never actually considered something like that before. We always hear like these species are going extinct. All this stuff is dying off. We got to save the elephants and save the rhinos. Everything, it's all disappearing. But I had never really considered like, oh, what other kind of weird, freakish things are being created that we don't know about, to this day. And so I always thought that was cool. But yeah, Fluke Man, Turdman, whatever. He opens his eyes. That's how it ends. Jeremy, your thoughts on this episode?
It was far and away the grossest episode we've had yet. I enjoyed it because the monster was good, the special effects were good all the way through it. It's just, oh man, this episode was. Don't lick your lips
Poopy
while watching this episode because you're gonna taste it.
Yeah, this is probably the most horror-esque kind of show or episode that I feel that we've really gotten. We've had some horror type episodes, and one like you could argue Squeeze and Tombs are very sort of horror centric, but this was like just the way it was shot. Everything was dark, and the monster was gross and nasty. This one is just one of those things that always stuck out to me as one of my favorite episodes because it was just, I don't know, everything about it other than that reaction shot Mulder has to seeing it for the first time works for me. So some of the cool little tidbits I found about this one is Chris Carter claimed to have been inspired to write the episode based on 3 incidents: his dog having worms, his research into Chernobyl, and the extinction of species during the 1990s, which is something that we would hear about all the time. Species going extinct and we got to save them and stuff like that. Now, we were talking about at the end of this, Turdman's eyes open, and we could potentially see further adventures of Turdman? Well, we do. So, in the 2013 comic continuation of The X-Files called Season 10, a 2-issue story, Hosts, continues the story almost 20 years later after the events of this episode. According to the comics, the Fluke Man escaped to Martha's Vineyard and began to multiply, abducting multiple beachgoers. And that's one of the big things in this episode is they're trying to get to the Fluke Man before he starts to multiply. And that's the whole reason Mulder's down there with the dude trying to stop him. The Fluke Man and its offspring were nearly all killed, however, by a man revealed to be one of the Chernobyl liquidators. In addition, the story expanded upon the Fluke Man's backstory, revealing that he was a liquidator named Gregory, who, after being locked in a sewage tanker truck at Chernobyl, gestated the mutated fluke worm that grew into the original Fluke Man after he was exposed to irradiated cooling water from the still-burning nuclear reactor and to flatworms in the sewage tank. So you have kind of like almost like a comic book villain origin story here. If you're interested in what happened with a story with the Fluke Man going forward. Chris Carter described his mood while writing this episode as, quote, "I was in a funk when I wrote that episode. We were coming back from hiatus and I was trying to find something more interesting than just the Fluke Man. I was irritated at the time and I brought my irritation to Mulder's attitude. Basically, he had become fed up with the FBI. They had given him what he felt was a low assignment, which was sending him into the city after a dead body. But lo and behold, he finds that this is a case that for all intents and purposes is an X-File. It's been given to him by a man he's never looked at as an ally, Skinner. So it's an interesting establishing of a relationship between them. The Fluke Man, also known affectionately as Fluky by the cast and crew, was portrayed by Darren Morgan, brother of executive producer Glenn Morgan. Now, the Fluke Man suit used by Morgan, which included flipper-like feet, yellow contact lenses, and fake teeth, took 6 hours to put on. This process was eventually sped up, but Morgan wore the suit as much as 20 consecutive hours during shooting.
Oh, God.
As a result, he was forced to go to the bathroom while still wearing the suit. So even the actor was in his own shit in this episode. So Morgan was rarely on set without being in full costume, and recalled that when he met up with David Duchovny again upon joining the series' writing staff, the actor had no idea who he was, despite having enjoyed an amiable relationship with the costumed Morgan previously. Now, to your point about the water, the suit dissolved in water, forcing special effects artist Toby Lindala to reconstruct the suit each day. Because the suit did not permit Morgan to breathe through his nose, he was unable to eat while wearing it. Now, Carter had to fight with Fox Network's broadcast standards department over the scene where a victim vomits up a fluke worm in the shower. James Wan described it as the grossest piece of television ever put on the air. As Gillian Anderson's pregnancy was getting more apparent, the producer started to shoot Scully's scenes in a way it would be disguised with, quote, very fancy trick angles, trench coats, and scenes where she is seated rather than standing. So those are some interesting tidbits about the host. Again, I love this episode. One of my favorites. I'm sure when we eventually do our season 2 wrap up with our top 5 best, this is going to be on there. I wouldn't be surprised. I wouldn't be surprised if it ends up being number 1, honestly. But I want to go through the rest of the season here to sort of see if anything sort of changes my mind. But I love this episode. Love it so much. Anything else you want to say about the host?
Getting back to what you had just said about the shower scene being the part that people had the executives had the biggest problem with, that was nowhere near as gross as that autopsy scene was. So,
oh yeah,
whose standard are we living?
I don't know. That autopsy thing though. As soon as that fluke worm like comes out and stuff, and she's trying to yank it out with no fucking mask. Put your mask on, Scully. Goddamn. Yeah. The whole episode just oozes grossness. Everything is gross, and I love the feel that this thing gives. And I think the monster is one of the most memorable kind of monsters in all of X-Files as we sort of go through it. I just love it. So there you go, ladies and gentlemen. There's our discussion on The Host. What do you think about The Host? Leave a comment down below. Was it as poopy as you remember it being and uncomfortable as you remember it being? Let us know. Next week, we are going to talk about episode 3 of season 2. It's called Blood, and we're getting back to technology-based sci-fi horror type stuff. So again, hit that like and subscribe. Check back next Friday for another episode of eXhuming the X-Files.